So this week I acted out of my character. I've been very upset with myself for a couple of days, and I want to tell you guys why. So, as some of you guys know, I previously had been living in like very spiritual, hippie, nature-esque communities, and I recently moved back to my home city, which is Dallas, and have started back like working in my career, which is real estate. And this past week, I had like a big, I don't know, wake up call or realization, or I had just like a big shift in my mindset, and I wanted to talk to you guys about it. So, I work from home. I work for myself, although I do have like a team that works. I own a company and I have a team that works underneath me. I do interact with people pretty frequently over the phone. But for the most part, like I work from home and I work alone. So I'm kind of wrapped up in my own energy. And over this past week, being somebody who is in real estate, I have to interact with like clients. I have to interact with property managers. Like there's people that I'm interacting with. And this week was a challenging week for me. And I'm going to tell you why. So this week I had a handful of clients and one other interaction with like an individual, like a property manager that I dealt with that really kind of shook me. And it made me realize like how challenging it can be to be like operating in the city, operating in like the matrix, like operating in like a community of people that are just like always on the go and maybe not as conscious of like their energy. And so without going into like a ton of detail, basically I dealt with like a handful of individuals this week, different situations where I was working with them, or maybe I had a call with them, and I like allowed their negative energy to really get to me, and it rubbed off on me, and it like transferred onto me. And I this week have really been struggling because I'm like, okay, how do I operate as like I'm trying to be somebody who's very self-conscious about my energy, self-conscious about the way that I live my life and all of that. And it's like, how do you operate in a society where there's other people you're having to interact with frequently, whether it be coworkers or family members or friends or peers or just somebody at the grocery store? Like, how do we operate? And although we can try to like master our own energy, like the real test is really showing up, at least for me, like when I'm having to try to interact with other people who maybe aren't as aware of themselves. And so this week, I had a couple of interactions with some people that were like overstepped boundaries of mine, or energetically just were really heavy to talk to. Like even just having a phone call with somebody who like they were super negative or super just heavy to like interact with. I had another situation where I had somebody who like, I don't know if they were having a bad day, but they were very nasty to me. And I'm not gonna lie, like these interactions that I've observed and had, they affected me. Whether I ended up like crying after getting off the phone with one of these individuals, or whether I like, if somebody was rude to me, I also was rude back. Like you know, this past week had observed like, oh my gosh, I'm trying so hard to be reflective. I'm trying so hard to be in control of my energy and aware of like the energy that I'm getting off to people. And I realized like, wow, if I even though I try so hard to be aware of myself, like how do I show up when I interact with somebody who's not aware of themselves, or they don't care, or they're just so oblivious? And I'm finding that like that's really where the work is, and that's really where like the opportunity for growth is when like how are we operating and how are we acting whenever we're receiving energy from somebody who's just like not, it just doesn't feel good. And I realized this past week like how much I'm so sensitive right now, or maybe I've always just been super sensitive in my life and I never really could put a finger on what it was that I was. But I am realizing, like, if I interact with somebody who has like a dark energy or their spirit is just not great, like it really, really affects me. And I'm like realizing I have a lot more work to do on myself, because as much as I can be at peace and be kumbaya and like zen, as much as I could experience this version of me, like sitting in my apartment, like interacting with other people who are also on that wavelength, it's like when I interact with people who aren't on that wavelength, I've seen over this past like week, I haven't shown up as I wish that I would have. And so I'm, after doing some like deep reflection about, how my energy had been deeply affected this week by interacting with some people, I'm realizing like, okay, what can I do in order to move through those situations differently in the future? And one of the things I realized is like, okay, I definitely need to have boundaries, even with like people I do business with. Like I work in a business where people call my phone, and it could be a client or it could be a property manager or something. So I usually answer calls that I don't know. And I'm now realizing, okay, even if I'm in a business that's like that, maybe I screen all my calls. Like maybe I don't answer phone calls of people that I don't know, or maybe even if I do know who they are, maybe I send them a text and say, hey, like, got your call in a meeting. Like, what is it that you're needing to chat about? Like, I want to set up a time, like, being able to screen, like, what type of call, like, what type of energy am I walking into right now? So I've like learned about that. And also like, I've realized like, I'm not somebody who's quick on my feet when it comes to like putting up boundaries. So if I'm in real time having a conversation with somebody and they're like overstepping my boundary, I need to get better about being able to like slowly process through what's going on in order to set boundaries in real time. Because oftentimes we can't always just like screen our calls and be able to decide like, oh, do I want to deal with this or not? So I'm like realizing I really need to get better about like being able to like on the spot put up boundaries. And also another thing that like is common sense, but it's challenging, is just if I'm interacting with somebody who maybe has like a really negative energy, or maybe they're being nasty to me, like just firstly having compassion and being like, okay, maybe they're having a bad day or whatever it is, but also not allowing their energy to affect me or trigger me. And like that's what's happened. That's what happened this week, is like I allowed somebody's like poor attitude or energy or whatever trigger me, and I reacted. And then what happened? I felt guilty for days after, even though I wasn't the person who started it. Like I wasn't the person who was rude first. I definitely participated in like not being a pleasant person either, because I felt triggered by them for being rude to a complete stranger. So these are just some things that I've been like really realizing. I'm like, okay, I can be super zen in my house. I can be super zen with all of my friends that are like also on this type of lifestyle, like being very aware of their energy. But like, how am I showing up when I'm not around situations or people that are also very reflective or also on a journey of growth and healing, or whatever you want to say? And I just realized this week, like, I have a lot of work to do. And it's been good to experience, to understand that about myself. I will say for a couple of hours, a couple of days, I did feel extremely guilty about the way that I showed up. But everything that I've been learning and all of like my studies is that like whenever we do get triggered, we need to just notice it, be aware of it, and be neutral about it, not judge ourselves, not beat ourselves up about it. So although I was feeling kind of guilty about the way that I acted this week, as far as just like letting people overstep my boundaries or me showing up in a way I wasn't proud of, I also am trying to like move through not feeling guilty about it and just being aware of it. And just figuring out like, okay, how can I do better next time with that situation? And that's been a really big thing for me, because I am like the queen of making myself, like beating myself up about just the way that I show up sometimes. So this was like real practice that I've been experiencing this week. And I wanted to make a video about it because it's been a heavy week for me emotionally. Yeah, it's like I've questioned like, okay, why am I back here in these energies or communities where like everybody is just so heavy. One of my friends, ironically from Mexico, like she's visiting the Dallas area to visit to see her family, and it was so funny because like she had sent me a voice memo and was like, is it just me or is everybody just so sad here? And it was right on time for me to receive that because this is like after days of me just interacting with people that just like super challenged me, challenged my energy. And it just made me realize that I wasn't crazy, that like going from living in Mexico where at least in the community I was in, like everything was vibrant and there was tons of colors and people were happy and a sense of community and people were happy to help you. Like going from like living in a place like that to back in America, back in like a metropolitan city where everyone is like trying to accomplish something, trying to run from this event to that event, or trying to be or maybe too busy to help you. Like they're like, oh, I'm too busy to answer my phone right now. I have too much other, like, you know, everybody's in a rush. Like the culture's just different here. It was just ironic and funny to that my friend that I had met in Mexico, that she also noticed it upon being here for like a couple of days. Let me know that I wasn't crazy. So I'm really trying to like, I'm really, really trying to dive deep into myself. As I've talked about before, it could or would have or was so easy to just live in communities where like people are all like kumbaya and meditating on the beach. Like that was super nice and it was great. Obviously there was like its own set of darkness in communities like that, but now I'm trying to like be here in this community, be a member of this society here in Dallas, here in America, in the real estate industry. And I'm just trying to figure out how can I navigate and be like this Zen kumbaya person, but also in a space where there's people that maybe are not as aware of themselves. So I want to know, like, is this something that you've observed like within yourself? If you're somebody who's on like a personal development, personal growth, like vibe, how are you showing up in communities, settings where people maybe aren't on that same page? Maybe they don't care about what their energy gives off, or maybe they're just totally unaware of themselves, which is like a big one too. How are you showing up? How are you dealing with this? Because I know this past week has been a really big challenge for me, but it's been a wake up call too. So I want to know in the comments below.